hear of a town that got rid of its entire Chinese population, legally, efficiently, and with a smile? Welcome to Tacoma, Washington, 1885. They didn't use torches. They used planning committees, and they called it the Tacoma Method. In the late 1800s, Chinese immigrants had built railroads, cleared forests, and opened businesses. They literally helped build Tacoma. But once the economy dipped and white residents wanted someone to blame, guess who became the problem? Not the corporations, not the policies, but the Chinese. Instead of an angry mob, although they did have one waiting, Tacoma's mayor, city council, and police department sat down like civilized men and said, let's get rid of them, but make it look organized. They gave Chinese residents a deadline, get out by November 3rd. And when that day came, armed locals marched into Chinatown. They went door to door and forced hundreds of people, elders, workers, and even children, into the freezing rain. They walked them 10 miles out of the city on foot. No arrests, no one charged. And then they burnt Chinatown to the ground. They called it the Tacoma Method because it was neat, clean, nonviolent, but it was still ethnic cleansing, just wrapped in city council minutes and polite paperwork. And the wildest part, Tacoma bragged about it for years. They said, we didn't have a riot. We had a solution. The next time someone says, that's not who we are, remind them, America doesn't just erase people with fire and force. It erases them with laws, signatures, and silence, wraps it in a bow, and calls it progress.
You're taught in school that slavery ended in the Civil War. It did for about 10 years. By 1877, there was a compact made by North and South that the South could do what it felt like, essentially. So they reinstituted slavery, but they reinstituted it in a much more brutal form. What they did is criminalize black life. So if a black man is standing on a street corner, he can be arrested for vagrancy. If he looks at a white woman, he can be arrested for attempted rape, or something. And it didn't matter if you were in for a $10 fee, you'd never get out, because you couldn't pay the corrupt judge, and you couldn't pay the lawyer, and you didn't have any money anyway. So it was essentially permanent servitude. These criminalized blacks were then handed over to industry. And that's a large part of American industrial development. There was big Southern industrialization based on mines, steel, U.S. Steel, and so on. A lot of it's just based on agriculture, of course. They went right back to the cotton fields. And this is a large part of American economic history. That's based, and it was worse than slavery for exactly the reasons that the slave owners had always argued. When we own these guys, we take care of them. When we just pick them up from the jails, we don't give a damn about them. If they die of starvation, fine, we'll get more from the jails. So you had a period worse than slavery. It went up to the Second World War, was not small, big impact on American industrial history.
This is a list of 5 black towns that were destroyed to create structures of white progress. Oscarville, Georgia, was burnt down in 1912 after a white woman was found unalive. The assumption was that a black man violated her. Later in the 1950s, the Beaufort Dam was built, flooding the remains of the town to create Lake Lanier. Benson, Alabama, flourished with businesses, schools, and churches until 1926, when the construction of the Martin Dam submerged the town to create Lake Martin. Seneca Village, New York, boasted homes, churches, and a school until the 1850s, when the city seized the land through eminent domain to create Central Park. Susanna, Alabama, another casualty of white progress, met its end in the 1960s with the construction of the Martin Dam, displacing its residents and erasing their vibrant community from the map. Vanport, Oregon, represented hope and opportunity until a catastrophic flood in 1948 wiped it away.
Did you know that the U.S. had concentration camps in the late 1920s? In 1927, levees along the Mississippi River burst in over 145 places, flooding a region the size of New England. Over 100,000 homes were destroyed, farmland and livestock was ruined, hundreds died, and 700,000 people in Louisiana, Arkansas, and Mississippi were displaced. President Calvin Coolidge didn't believe in federal intervention, so he appointed Herbert Hoover to oversee the Red Cross's efforts. The Coast Guard, Army, and Navy rounded up those displaced into Red Cross camps, which were segregated by race since this was during Jim Crow. In Mississippi, black camps quickly turned into labor camps. Plantation owners requested the governor and the National Guard to ensure black residents stayed to work and to guard them against, quote, a possible influx of labor agents who would seize this opportunity to take the refugees to the north and give them work. Whites were allowed to evacuate, but black men were ordered to, quote, stay in established camps. Houseless black women and children also stayed in these camps to be with their sons and fathers. Black men were ordered by whites they did not know to repair homes, businesses, and plantations. Signs in Mississippi read, "Refugee labor is free to all white men." Those who didn't work or tried to escape were beaten or killed by National Guard troops patrolling the camps. Black evacuees were forced to repair levees, clean towns, and haul supplies off ships and into camps, trudging for miles through knee-deep water and mud. While whites enjoyed cooked meat and canned peaches, black camps only received bread. Whites received new clothes and health care and moved into large stores and hotels, while black evacuees lived along livestock and slept outside on wet ground. Over 300,000 black Americans were interned in 154 camps. In some camps, black men were forced to wear collars to keep track of work assignments and what plantation they came from. Since Coolidge didn't provide funds, Hoover and the Red Cross manufactured a positive image with the media to get funds. So they kept the physical detainment and denial of proper food and shelter a secret. People from across the country donated to charity, unaware that their funds were siphoned to uphold these camps. The cover-up bolstered Hoover's reputation as a great humanitarian, and this national hero persona catapulted him to the presidency. After the camps closed due to lack of funds, millions of black Southerners left the South, exacerbating the Great Migration. Historians apply the term concentration camps because of forced labor, deplorable conditions, and the imprisonment of innocent people of one particular group. You won't find this history in U.S. classrooms or textbooks. And did you know this history?
On January 1st, 7th, 1923, a thriving black town named Rosewood was destroyed after a white woman claimed to have been assaulted by a black man. Her husband gathered an angry white mob of several hundred. They went to Rosewood and spent the week shooting and lynching every resident they found and burned their properties. Any and every survivor that either evacuated by train or hid out in nearby swamps abandoned their homes and never returned.
The twisted mouth.
You seen things on fire, a big blaze, just burning down, just burning up the whole thing, just burning up my grandmama's house, churches, and everything. They burned up everything we had, all our clothes and everything. Yeah, they burned it up.
Why did they burn everything?
They was mad.
But you were just little children.
I know it. What did we care? They didn't care. They killed us. I was about 8 years old.
Minnie Lee Langley was only a child when she became a refugee. Now, she's a great-grandmother. At her home in Jacksonville, Florida, we talked to her about the place where she was born, Rosewood, Florida, the place that haunts her memory.
I know they killed my aunt, and they killed my granddaddy. Made my granddaddy dug his hole. He didn't have but one arm, but they made him dug his own grave. And he prayed, and they shot him backwards in the grave.
At Rosewood?
At Rosewood.
In the early 1900s, deep in the heart of Tulsa, Oklahoma, there was a neighborhood unlike any other, Greenwood, a place so prosperous, so self-sufficient, that it was known as Black Wall Street. Founded in 1906 by O.W. Gurley, a wealthy black landowner, Greenwood became a haven for black entrepreneurs, doctors, lawyers, and business owners. At a time when racial segregation was the law of the land, Black Wall Street thrived, proving that African Americans could build generational wealth despite the odds. Greenwood had everything: banks, grocery stores, schools, hotels, even a hospital. Money stayed within the community. It was a symbol of black excellence, ambition, and unity. But on May 31st, 1921, everything changed. A young black man named Dick Rowland was accused of assaulting a white woman in an elevator. The truth didn't matter. Mobs of white men gathered, tensions rose, and within hours, they launched one of the deadliest racial massacres in American history. For 2 days, Greenwood was under siege. Homes and businesses were looted and burned. Planes even dropped bombs, making it one of the first aerial attacks on U.S. soil. By June 1st, Black Wall Street was reduced to ashes. Over 300 black residents were killed. Thousands were left homeless. Despite the devastation, the people of Greenwood rebuilt. But the scars of the massacre, combined with systemic racism, made it impossible to regain its former glory. Black Wall Street was erased from history books, but its legacy lives on. The story of Black Wall Street is a painful reminder of what was lost, but also of what was possible. It was more than just a place. It was a blueprint for Black prosperity, a testament to resilience, and a story that must never be forgotten.
Survivors and their family members have been trying for years to get what they called the justice of their lifetimes for what happened more than 100 years ago. In an 8-1 ruling, the Oklahoma State Supreme Court upheld a decision made by a Tulsa district judge last year. That ruling said the Tulsa race massacre survivors' grievances, although legitimate, did not qualify for reparations.
If they were going to do reparation the easy way, it would have already been done.
Our partner station in Tulsa spoke with Willie Sells, owner of T's Barbershop, the longest-standing business on Black Wall Street since its rebirth.
Those people that were here suffered a terrible loss, and I think it's affected the city down through the years.
It's estimated up to 300 Black Tulsans were killed, and over 30 blocks of the city were devastated by a white mob in 1921. The few living survivors sued the city of Tulsa and others in 2020, seeking reparations for the trauma they lived through. The city and insurance companies never compensated victims for their losses, and the massacre ultimately resulted in racial and economic disparities that still exist today, the lawsuit argued.
We're hoping and trusting and praying that the city, the state, or somebody in Oklahoma would give reparation to those survivors.
Let's talk about Philadelphia, the city that bombed itself. Truly know this story, you have to know the MOVE organization. MOVE, typically characterized as capital M-O-V-E, is not an acronym. It was founded by John Africa in 1972. They were a deeply religious communal organization that consisted of mostly African Americans who wore their hair in locks. They believed that we were all created equal, and they believed heavily in nature and preserving nature. Most looked at MOVE as a radical organization. Due to the nature of their organization and their beliefs, they would regularly get complaints from neighbors and people in the community. These complaints and the fact that the police did not like them led to a shootout in 1978 where an officer was killed. 9 members of the organization were charged with the death of that officer and sentenced to 100 years in prison apiece. In 1981, the MOVE organization moved to a row house on 6221 Osage Avenue. Neighbors would regularly complain about trash and loitering around the house, and sometimes the MOVE organization leaders would shout political statements and things of that nature over a bullhorn in the neighborhood. So these complaints led to the police getting involved, and remember, the police did not like the MOVE organization to begin with. 1985, Philadelphia police obtained arrest warrants for 4 MOVE members. The warrants cited things like illegal possession of firearms, contempt of court, evading parole, things of that nature. On May 13, 1985, 500 police officers showed up to the MOVE house. See, what they did was they knew this is going to get chaotic. So they went around the neighborhood and told all of the neighbors, hey, vacate your house now. They were trying to weed out the MOVE members of the house that they were trying to arrest by way of their arrest warrant. So they cut off the lights, the gas, things of that nature to try to weed them out. In the house at the time consisted of 7 adults and 6 children. After the MOVE members did not budge, the police officers lobbed tear gas canisters into the building. This led to a 90-minute firefight. One officer was hit in the back and the police commissioner said no more. He authorized that 2 one-pound bombs be dropped on the house. Bombs caused a massive blaze. John Africa, the member of MOVE, was killed. In addition to John Africa, 5 other adults and 5 children aged 7 to 13 were also killed. The blaze was so big that it spread to all the other houses in the row, and 65 houses were completely destroyed. There's a theory that the firefighters were commanded not to put the fire out. The only person formally charged after this event was Ramona Africa, one of the surviving members of the fire. She was charged with rioting and conspiracy and served 7 years in prison. In 1996, a federal jury ordered that Ramona Africa and the relatives of 2 people killed in the fire were paid $1.6 million. Not enough. In 2005, a federal judge ordered $12.8 million be paid to people that were displaced 20 years prior by the fire. November 12, 2020, the City Council of Philadelphia established a day of remembrance and recognition for the destruction that was caused in 1985. Philadelphia, the city that bombed itself. I bet you never heard this story.
You know, the 90s was crazy, you know, the 2000s hit, but then Katrina does happen. And no one could expect it, you know, for them levees to break like that and kind of flood the Ninth Ward. And, you know, the devastation that followed after that.
They blew them up. They blew them levees I just want to say that.
Okay, okay.
They blew them up.
So y'all heard the explosions? Or
I
y'all
wasn't
just...
there, but I know they blew them up.
All right, let's talk about it then. Let's talk about it. Why do you feel they blew them up, and what was the purpose behind?
Well, see, that's the thing. I don't feel like that. Minister Farrakhan sent divers down there, and what they found was consistent with military explosives. That you can get only from the military. You can only get from the military, so that's a fact.
So what would you say they gained from it? Like,
you got certain parts of town they flooded out. They flooded certain parts of the city out. So they could buy those people land up. And that's what they did. People came back, couldn't even buy their houses they had loaned for 100 years.
That's true.
They flooded certain parts of the city so they can buy that land up and gentrify New Orleans. They gentrified New Orleans.
Yeah, let's talk about this. Because for Katrina, because I was there, I was 15 when Katrina hit. And the storm came. And I remember that next morning, the next day, my mom's best friend came walking through the projects, you know, to come see us. It wasn't flooded. It was not flooded at all that bad. Now, that night, because we was in the St. Bernard projects, that night, because we had hurricane parties and everything, that night, you heard that loud boom. And after you heard that loud boom, you heard that, it was a loud sound. It was like going through the whole New Orleans. And that's when you seen all that water start rushing in. It literally felt like how Titanic was, because everybody was trying to save people that was on the lower floors of the projects, because we was on the second and third floor.
In a perfect world, yes, people would think, oh, well, why on earth would they do that? Why would they want to blow up the levees and flood these people out and cause all this catastrophe? Just like everything else in America, it's about that money, baby. If we can flood other places and redirect water to other places that mean absolutely or very little to us to save the ports that are our cash cow, that's what they're going to do. And in doing so, they figure, hey, we could just flood them out. People that are renting, people that are struggling to keep their homes, we could flood those places out. Hopefully those people won't come back. And then we could just capitalize on that and attract more people with money here. Now, am I saying that there aren't situations where the levees were not breached in a normal way? No. But also our levees run all around our whole city. So multiple things could be true at the same time. People could have heard the levees being blown up. A boat could have hit the levee at another spot. The levee could have been just unable to withstand the water at another spot. But what I can tell you is Katrina had absolutely nothing to do with those levees. As I stated before, the water didn't come until after Katrina. So although I appreciate your positive perspective, I can definitely tell you that this was highly motivated on capitalism and just, you know, trying to make good on what they felt was best for the city at the time.
In other words, George Bush Jr. was such a genius. He had all the crises of previous presidents. He had Nixon's election crises. He had Hoover's economic crises. He had Adams's trample the Constitution crises. He had all these corruption scandals like U.S. Grant did. He was amazing. No president has managed to fit so many crises into an 8-year span of time. And I'm not done yet. He actually turned a hurricane into a disaster. Katrina. We knew Katrina was going to hit New Orleans. We did. We knew it was going to hit it. 100%, every model showed it was going to hit New Orleans. We had 2 weeks to prepare. 1 week before it hit Florida, and then it hit Florida, and then it crossed Florida, and it went straight to New Orleans, just like everything said. It was a Category 4 hurricane heading to New Orleans. Everybody who knew anything about New Orleans knew Category 2 or more, probably the end of the city. The city was not designed to survive a Category 5 hurricane. It's below sea level, for one thing. You gotta ask the people who did that a question. Wait, you put this city below sea level? That seemed like a good idea at the time. In a hurricane-filled Gulf of Mexico. Well, he did nothing for those 2 weeks. He wasted the 2 weeks. The hurricane missed, by the way. Katrina did not hit New Orleans. It hit Mississippi and Alabama. He got lucky. At the last minute, the hurricane powered down to Category 3 and turned hard right and smacked into Mississippi and Alabama. The news initially said, oh, whew, dodged a bullet. Whew. New Orleans was in big trouble. The levees broke. The Mississippi flooded from Katrina and the city drowned. Oops. Sorry about that. Yeah, the hurricane missed, but it's still a catastrophe. Oh well. It's a black city, it's okay.
I hate the way they portray us in the media. If you see a black family, it says they're looting. See a white family, it says they're looking for food. And you know it's been 5 days because most of the people are black. And even for me to complain about, I would be a hypocrite because I've tried to turn away from the TV because it's too hard to watch. I've even been shopping before even giving a donation. So now I'm calling my business manager right now to see what is the biggest amount I can give, and just to imagine if I was down there, and those are my people down there. So anybody out there that wants to do anything that we can help with the setup, the way America is set up to help the poor, the black people, the less well off as slow as possible. I mean, Red Cross is doing everything they can. We already realize a lot of the people that could help are at war right now, fighting another way, and they've given them permission to go down and shoot us.
And subtle, but in even many ways more profoundly devastating, is the lasting damage to the survivors' will to rebuild and remain in the area. The destruction of the spirit of the people of southern Louisiana and Mississippi may end up being the most tragic loss of all.
George Bush doesn't care about black people.
Please call.
Boys in Blue was supposed to help out, you know. All of a sudden I seen the difference of Boys in Blue.
So if you'd known he'd been shot by a police officer, you wouldn't have brought him here, probably.
Nah, I wouldn't have brought him here because I knew if I brought him here, I wouldn't stand a snowball chance if I knew he got shot by a cop.
So basically, that is a documentary showing how police were basically attacking the citizens and people that were in New Orleans, black people specifically. And basically, the story was that guy and his brother went out to go try to get supplies, and one of the brothers was shot and killed by the police. The family then goes, and a friend or some random dude drives by with a truck. They're trying to get him to safety. He's laying out bleeding from his chest. They get him in the truck. They said the hospital was too far, and he was like, it was going to probably be packed. So they drove up a mile up the street to a school. The police was there, and it was like their encampment. They also had medical personnel there also. The police then, when they get out to get help from the police basically beat their ass and handcuffed them. And one police gets in the car, in the truck, and drives off. So after research and, months go by, they basically find out that the police had shot their brother, and the police basically covered it up by arresting the man trying to help and the other brother. And they took the truck with the brother that was in the back bleeding out to a couple miles down the road from the school, and basically chopped his head off and burned the vehicle and all the evidence. Now, I've seen a lot of documentaries about Katrina. I mean, I'm from Louisiana, I'm from Shreveport, so we didn't get directly hit by it, but a lot of the refugees and stuff, and people seeking, to get away from everything had came up to where we was at. And then a lot of friends and stuff had to go and volunteer and do stuff down in New Orleans afterwards. And if you hear some of the stories that them folks told, even in regards to the FEMA camps, how police were doing the black people, even how the levees actually broke, how they heard explosions and they feel like it was an inside job. It's very, in a sense, apocalyptic. You know what I'm saying? And I don't think people look at Katrina enough, considering where it was, number one, and who it impacted mostly, which was poor and black people. And it was kind of before the age of information like we have now, social media and stuff. It was like 05. So it was kind of right before that cusp of the wave of information that we had. But if you look and read and, go into the history of what happened, it gives you good insight to when the world finally does go to shit, how things are really going to go as far as the government, policing, just society as a whole. When things collapse or when things get bad, which they're coming, look at how Katrina went down. Look at how the wealthy were able to get out and do whatever they needed to do, and the poor and the black people and those that didn't have the resources were treated and done. Look at how the government handled it. Look at the law enforcement that's supposed to be helping, and things that like the lawlessness that occurred. See, I don't think we talk about it a lot. People don't really discuss it a lot. It's just kind of like, oh, it was a hurricane. Oh, but start reading up about what really happened down there in New Orleans during Katrina. You think Maui was bad? Go look at some real documentaries and some people like YouTube stories of, telltale events from people who was there talk about what went down in Katrina in that Superdome that they have, like all of that. Go look.
Because think about it this way. White people didn't undergo 250 years of slavery and its aftermath. White people didn't suffer through racial segregation. White people didn't have a government that restricted their ability to own property, open a business, or own a bank account to grow generational wealth for their children and their children's children. White people didn't have to go through these things. So if we were just to ignore the fact that black people in America had to go through all of these things that have now systemically disadvantaged them even today, and we were instead to say, ignore one's race and treat everybody the same, well then all of a sudden black people will continue to be disparaged. Imagine if you were playing a game of Monopoly with your friends. The banker, for whatever reason, really fucking hated you. He only gave you $10, gave everyone else $50, right? Then Mr. Jesus 2.0, man of equality, walks in and he says, well, I understand that you've been disadvantaged. I have the option to now give you an additional $40 to account for the fact that the banker kind of cheated you out of $40 to begin with. But instead, I'm just going to continue to treat you the same way I'm going to treat everybody else. Well, then all of a sudden, you're still experiencing a disadvantage today. And when we talk about programs or legislation to say target black Americans or target indigenous Americans, it aims to serve to fix the consequences of systemic forms of oppression in which have disadvantaged black Americans or indigenous Americans historically, which has perpetuated negative consequences that exist today for black Americans or indigenous Americans that don't exist for white Americans.
I agree with you. We pushed them back. We held them down for so long. And, whenever we finally was like, all right, you can do whatever you want, they were down so low that it's hard to get up. I understand that. And I understand that we needed to pay a little price, but, the question is going to come in, when does it stop?
I don't know if you can think of a people who were more held back, more deprived, more sabotaged than African Americans. You took everything away from them and took them away from everything. They started in your country at less than zero, literally regarded and treated as subhuman, not allowed to learn to read or write or anything for hundreds of years. But you see, they come from a people of accomplishment to one degree or another, not a people of piracy and theft and appropriation. They come from a people who created and built and developed in their own land. And even though you did everything that you could possibly do to suppress them, to hold them down, to hold them back, and you're still doing that until today, nevertheless, I don't think anyone can dispute the fact that African Americans have become a global cultural superpower. Culturally, they're a superpower. Whatever cultural soft power that America has in the global South, it's African American.
And especially the African American experience. It's literally not duplicated anywhere on earth in history. African Americans are a completely unique phenomenon as a people. Who they are culturally, what their history is, what their experience is, isn't duplicated anywhere on earth. You don't know where you came from. You don't know what country you came from. You don't know what culture you came from. You don't know what language you came from. You don't know what your religion was before. You, like I've said before, you're more American than anyone because you don't have any other identity. Actually, your entire identity is American-based. That's not the case of anyone else. I'm Irish American. I'm German American. I'm Italian American. I'm Jewish American. I'm this or that, the other. You can say African American, but you don't know anything about Africa. You don't even know which part of Africa. Africans don't call themselves that because I know my tribe. I have my language. I have my region, my country, my whatever. like me saying European American. I'm not European. I'm specifically Irish and German. But you can't say that. You are American. You're the original Americans. You know, everyone else is immigrants. You can't even be called immigrants. Yeah. You know, you're originally American, and your culture is as close to being the indigenous culture of America as there can be without you being the indigenous people. You know, you're the indigenous people of the entity called America, called the United States of America. Everything else came from elsewhere. Your culture is the only one that came from right there, because you were cut off from everything else. You know, there's nobody else like that. There's nobody else like that in the world. There's no other culture like that in the world.
Colonial history, the legacy of enslavement, racial subordination and segregation, racial terrorism and racial inequality in the US remains a serious challenge, as there has been no real commitment to reparation and to truth and reconciliation for people of African descent. Despite substantial changes since the end of the enforcement of Jim Crow and the fight for civil rights, ideology ensuring the domination of one group over another continues to negatively impact the civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights of African Americans today. The dangerous ideology of white supremacy inhibits social cohesion among the US population. Lynching was a form of racial terrorism that has contributed to a legacy of racial inequality that the US must address. Thousands of people of African descent were killed in violent public acts of racial control and domination, and the perpetrators were never held accountable. Contemporary police killings and the trauma it creates are reminiscent of the racial terror lynching of the past. Impunity for state violence has resulted in the current human rights crisis and must be addressed as a matter of urgency. Racial bias and disparities in the criminal justice system, mass incarceration, and the thought on crimes policy has disproportionately impacted African Americans. Mandatory minimum sentencing, disproportionate punishment of African Americans, including the death penalty, are of grave concern. The persistent gap in almost all the human development indicators, such as life expectancy, income and wealth, level of education, and even food security among African Americans and the rest of the US population, reflect the level of structural discrimination that create de facto barrier for people of African descent to fully exercise their human rights. There is a profound need to acknowledge that the transatlantic slave trade was a crime against humanity, and among the major sources and manifestations of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance, and that Africans and people of African descent were victims of this act, continue to be victims of their consequences. Past injustice and crimes against African Americans need to be addressed with reparatory justice. The working group urges Congress to expedite the passing of all pending criminal justice reform bills, including the End Racial Profiling Act, the Second Chance Reauthorization Act, and welcomes the bipartisan support for the Sentencing Reform and Correction Act, with, among other things, proposed to drastically reduce the use of mandatory minimum sentencing. The working group recommends to the government to allow independent monitoring of places of detention in the United States.
I don't think reparations for something that happened 150 years ago, for whom none of us currently living are responsible, is a good idea. We've elected an African-American president. I think we're always a work in progress in this country, but no one currently alive was responsible for that.
Remember, We're not talking about a gift to anybody. We're talking about mending what was broken. We're talking about the generational theft of the wealth of generations of African Americans. And just crossing out a racist policy and replacing it with a neutral one is not enough to deliver equality. Harms compound, just like a dollar saved in its value compounds over time. So does the value of a dollar stolen. And that is why the United States must act immediately with investments in minority-owned businesses, with investments in health equity, with investments in HBCUs, and on the longer term, look at reparations so that we can mend what has been broken.
Well, it is true that prior to redlining, a lot of the people who lived in the neighborhoods that became redlined were poor white people because it was based on poverty and not so much race. The 1930s New Deal era measures taken by the Federal Housing Administration implemented redlining. And the purpose was to provide housing opportunities to middle and lower class white people. So the poor white people who lived in those neighborhoods were able to move out and into the suburbs. And that is how the inner city became the inner city. And this was perpetuated by measures like the GI Bill. So ultimately, it was about segregation and providing opportunities to middle and lower class white people that were not made available to black people.
When people talk about American military excellence, they sure leave out the part where the best fighter pilots, the Tuskegee Airmen, won the first ever Top Gun competition in 1949. And instead of celebrating them, the military erased them.
Did you know prisoners of war had better liberties and freedoms and more rights than Tuskegee Airmen? Tuskegee Airmen, there are several accounts of the black soldiers and Tuskegee Airmen being denied liberties on the American Army base that German prisoners of war were able to utilize. Tuskegee Airmen and black soldiers were denied commissary, they were denied recreation, they were denied being able to eat at certain chow halls, and then they will walk past to see German prisoners of war, those that have been captured, walking around freely eating liberties as they well please, as if they were better than the pilots that shot them down. Imagine that. Capturing an enemy and the enemy is treated better than you in your own hometown. How would you feel? Are you familiar with the Freeman Field Mutiny? I didn't think so. So the Freeman Field Mutiny was a nonviolent protest in 1945 when African American officers were protesting the whites-only officer club at Freeman Army Air Force Base in Indiana. The protest was the precursor for the civil rights movement. Why does all that matter? Let me tell you. The Tuskegee Airmen were in Alabama from 1941 to 1945. In 1945, they were moved from Alabama to Indiana. The group that was moved over to Indiana was the 477th Bombardment Group. Remember the last video I told you about Daniel Keel? Okay. Well, today we're talking about Frank Pavallo. So, in the military, there's customs and courtesies. Enlisted congregate with enlisted, officers congregate with officers. Well, here at Indiana Air Force Base, the commanding officer didn't want any of the black pilots congregating or socializing or even eating with the white officers. And the black officers were forced to not only eat with the enlisted soldiers, but they was forced to eat after the enlisted soldiers, and whatever was left over, the scraps, would be served to the pilots, the black officers, the Tuskegee Airmen. Well, the Tuskegee Airmen, they were rebels. They knew their trade, they knew their shit, and they knew that they were good at what they did, and they were officers. So they had every right to eat in the officers' quarters. So they took it upon themselves, and they entered and ate at the whites-only officers' quarters. Well, the commanding officer of that base couldn't have that. So 105 Tuskegee Airmen, including Daniel Keel and Frank Pavallo, which I'm about to show you, were arrested. And they were being processed for court-martial. They were trying to kick them out of the military for refusing to abide by the segregation. And they called it a mutiny. Now, the Tuskegee Airmen, the 477 Bombardment Group, fought back. They wrote a letter to the highest commanding officer and demanded that, or requested that, if they are going to be court-martialed, kicked out of the military, that it not be from a captain, a commanding officer, but it be from a general. That's some ballsy move right there. Long story short, the general came down to that post to see what was going on. And they had a meeting. They had a whole meeting with all the officers to discuss the fate of the Tuskegee Airmen, if they were going to kick them out of the military or keep them. Do you know a fight broke out between the white officers? Some were in favor for the officers being treated for officers as officers, and we already know the others weren't. But the general locked them all up, not like threw them in jail, but put them all at attention, played the national anthem, and made an executive order that officers will be treated as such. All officers, black, white, and any other color. So the officers got their records eventually expunged. It took some time, and they got to go through the training and complete and become pilots.
The nation's first black military pilots who served in World War II, but their story is now being eliminated from the U.S. Air Force training under President Donald Trump's DEI ban. West 2's tonight, Governor Geddes has reaction from Central Florida's Tuskegee Airmen chapter.
Lesson plans on the Tuskegee Airmen, including the women Air Force service pilots, will no longer be part of the U.S. Air Force training courses. It comes as President Donald Trump cracks down on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives.
I was both surprised but extremely disappointed.
Toby Hubbard is president of Central Florida's General Daniel Chappie James Jr. chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen, Inc. It's named after America's first black four-star general who was from Pensacola.
Once folks started to know who the Tuskegee Airmen are, and I say many politicians, civic leaders, and folk in general were surprised to realize that had not the Tuskegee Airmen performed the way they did during World War II, the outcome would have been very different.
They were the country's first black military pilots. Serving in a segregated World War II unit, they accounted for more than 1,500 missions. Today, only a few of them are still alive, including at least 2 in Florida.
So many folk are going to be disappointed, and we're hoping that someone will change our president's mind.
In a statement, the national nonprofit Tuskegee Airmen, Inc. said in part, quote, "We believe the content of these courses does not promote one category of service member or citizen over another. They are simply a part of American military history that all service members should be aware of." Alabama Congresswoman Terry Sewell wants the Air Force to reverse the decision. She posted on X, quote, "The airmen bravely fought and died for our freedoms before this nation even granted them the full benefits of citizenship. To strip them from the Air Force curriculum is an outrageous betrayal of our values as Americans." Last year, Governor Ron DeSantis signed a bill to make Tuskegee Airmen Commemoration Day an official holiday in March.
It was 100% approved across the board. So the fact that both sides agreed upon it tells me that our legislators support, believe, and think supporting and honoring the Tuskegee Airmen is the right thing to do.
I don't care if it makes you mad. And I don't care if you don't think that I should be talking about it because I'm white. Because the truth is the truth. And if it bothers you that much, maybe you should ask yourself why. You know, after World War I, the GI Bill was created to help veterans buy houses and start businesses and go to college. It was built for the American middle class. But here's what they didn't teach you. Black veterans were intentionally left out. Colleges wouldn't admit them, and the ones who wanted to start businesses denied loans. Meanwhile, white veterans were securing homes and building wealth and passing it down to their children. And before you say that that was a long time ago, remind yourself the generational wealth doesn't expire. Black families today, on average, have 1/10 the wealth of bad decisions, not because they didn't work hard, but because the system made sure that they started 50 steps behind. You get mad about that.
Yes, this is really important. Asian Americans were redlined from opening businesses in white neighborhoods because white people didn't want Asian Americans operating in their neighborhoods and didn't want Asian Americans profiting off of white people. But because the positionality of Asian Americans is weaponized to oppress Black people, Asian Americans were being given loans to open businesses in Black communities, even though Black people were not able to receive loans to open businesses in their own communities. And as I've said before, as a result of this, Black wealth is essentially paid out twice when it goes to Asian American businesses, once when the individual pays for the goods or services, and then again when the Asian American business owner removes the profit from the community. Because usually people open businesses in their own communities, and this is mutually beneficial, where the business owner is making a livelihood off of providing goods and services to their community, and by being a member of the community, they're contributing and they're investing back into the community. This is an ideal situation, and that is not what happens with Asian American businesses operating in Black communities. Asian American businesses have been operating in Black communities for 60 years. I'll say it again. The Civil Rights Act passed in 1964, and the United States opened the door to Asian immigration in 1965 to put immigrants in the way of Black people.
There is a menace in office, and a white man put a black man in a chokehold because he thought he didn't live in the same complex as him. And he followed him all the way up to his apartment until there was obviously proof. And it amazes me that when it comes down to us, you guys always choose the physical route. Like the whole Austin Metcalf, Carmelo Anthony. Instead of going to authorities or trying to use some type of an adult, he chose to get physical. Why is it that you guys always get physical with us when we mind our business, don't disturb you, don't bother you, don't do nothing to y'all? But when it comes down to people, your people who look like you, actually hurting you, whether it's financially, emotionally, physically, socially, whatever the case may be, economically, like when they're hurting you guys are like, oh, we need to do an impeachment, or we need to use the justice system, or we need the justice to help. But when it's us, it's like physicality is like the first thing y'all want to go to. I'm tired. I am. I don't know what to think of you guys anymore at this point, because this man is a menace to our society right now, and you guys are just every day just talking and having these think pieces, but you guys don't want to stand up and go and physically do something about it. Like y'all did y'all little march a couple of weeks ago. I ain't heard nothing else come out of that, and here we are, 100 days in. Y'all still talking. But if it was us, y'all would have been physical. I'm just saying.
Savannah, why do you make everything about race? Like, why are you always talking about race? Like, not everything is about race. Everything is about race! It is! Everything is! Every single part of our society traces back to racism. Everything. The damn ice cream truck song is fucking racist. The reason we have credit scores and student loans is because they did not want black people to live next to them and go to school. Everything is encapsulated in the fact that they wanted black people to fail. Our society could be so much more progressive than it is now. Spent 400 years trying to keep minorities down, that we have not progressed in technology, in society, in anything. This country has spent so much time making sure that we don't surpass white people, that it's willing to cut its leg off during the sack race over and over and over and over again. And that's why we're in the fucking predicament that we're in now. It's not about anything else but the fact that they do not want minorities to thrive. That is what it's been about since day fucking one, when they got to this fucking land. They took it away from people who were already here and didn't stop doing it. I understand that sometimes we want to ha-ha, hee-hee, and live life and forget, but I'm always going to bring it up. If you don't want to hear it, don't talk to me, but I'm always going to talk about racism because it makes me fucking angry. You don't get to spend 400 plus years mistreating people based off of their skin tone alone. It caused ripples in generations. You haven't even began to try to undo it. But you want to get mad at me because every time I talk about racism, you get annoyed. Because every time I bring up something, oh, it's because this, it's because of racism, you get mad. Shut the fuck up.